Howard Cummings, you were the production designer on two very different HBO shows this year, Lovecraft Country and Westworld. So do you like working in the past or the future more?
Well, the cool thing about Westworld, and one of the reasons I wanted to do it, was that it has both future and past. And so that's great. And I have to make a big disclaimer. So I only did the pilot of Lovecraft Country. Kalina Ivanov she did the rest of the show. And so and I know her really well, and she's a wonderful designer and really up to the challenge of that show, because it's it's so imaginative and kind of like you never know where it's going, sort of thing. Same with Westworld. And so to be able to do two projects that are really, tonally different as well, was great. I had one carryover person on the show who was the decorator, Julie Ochapinchi, and she did both shows. I got to bring one person onto Lovecraft, and so to go from super Westworld futuristic stuff to 1950s Chicago was really a great adventure.
Mhm. How did Lovecraft come to you?
They did the pilot very separate from the show,
Mhm.
and it was truly a pilot, which they don't do very often anymore. But the way the show was set up, and then the pilot is somewhat different also because it is really Chicago is really the heart of episode one, and and it was a character, and they in fact shot the rest of the show in Atlanta. So they took parts of what I sort of set up. It was all, for me, it was all locations. I didn't get to build one set on that show, except that the locations were quite extensive. And so the director on that show, Jan Damage, he really wanted everything to physically connect. So I had to find an intersection that we could completely shut down, that had a place for the Negro travel office, and then upstairs had to have the apartment, and they all had to work completely together. It was really, and he really wanted the ability to put the camera in, like pull out the wind from outside the window, pull in and continue the scenes, so that everything was, you're always referencing the inside and the outside. And I'll have to say, Kalina and the show team did a really good job of they ended up building all of what I shot practically, but we had to like sort of we had to move out. There was a whole office on the ground floor. It was a record. It was like they did vinyl and all sorts. It was like a music production thing, and convinced them to move them all their stock, all the DVDs, everything out of there, and then cut a hole in the side of the building for a garage door, because it was supposed to be partly a garage. And then fortunately, that person who owned that shop also owned the whole building. So then we had to move out tenants to be able to read. The apartments did not look period correct. I had to resurface everything and tear out all the kitchen appliances and sinks and all that stuff, and just rebuild the whole thing. And so which actually helped later on when they had to build it as a set. They knew where to get everything, because we literally brought in everything for that. So and a lot of the office also had the same thing. So
Yeah.
but it was fun. But doing that was really an amazing adventure, because we shot it in this area of it's not in downtown Chicago. It's called Pilsen, and primarily a Latin neighborhood, and it was close to the studios we were shooting in, but it had the right kind of vibe. We didn't shoot in the south side of Chicago for that, but this was the closest thing to that. And it was very important to Misha Green, who was the creator, showrunner. She's a writer. She's kind of super talented, amazing person. She really wanted, street life was really important to her, that this, even though they were poor in Chicago, but it was also their safe haven. And then you find out why, of course, because as soon as they leave, there's monsters everywhere attacking them. So
Yeah, and the pilot does a really good job of establishing that with the block party, because it's very vibrant and energetic, and you just want to join in. And then they go on the road trip, so and it's bad things. But
yeah, and we tried to infuse a lot of what I liked is that we tried to infuse a lot of color into it. The DP especially. Pat Ratcliffe, he really wanted, we were really pushing the color. And then the costume designer, Dana Pink, did an amazing job of we coordinated with talking about palettes and stuff like that. And her clothing really just pops everything, that, and it's not strictly period all the time, but it was more that, it's more to give it life, that was more important. And so that was great, and then if you juxtapose that against Westworld is, really has a very narrow color palette. Especially season 1 and 2 is pretty much red, black, gray, and white. I literally used the same colors. I didn't vary at it. And then for the Western part, it was a lot of earth tones and browns, but never, we always held back on color. And this year in Westworld, this last season, when the robots go crazy and get out of the park, you do intersect color, but even then I sort of figured out ways to process it. And then, and we did that also with Shay Cunliffe, the costume designer on that show, did a lot to control palette with the extras and everybody to kind of reinforce all that. So it was great to work on 2 very different shows that had to have very different approaches.
Yeah. And in Westworld last season, it's future in LA, but it's non-dystopian. Everything's very sleek. And I know you guys drew inspiration from Singapore, but that's for, primarily the exterior. So what about the interiors and all the furniture, and what do you guys draw inspiration from for that?
Well, yeah, I mean, and actually in order to create the, LA in 2058, we actually did shoot in Singapore because we took, and it's great because Los Angeles had a building boom, and we got in right as buildings were opening. So we got full run of some of the buildings in downtowns that had elevated plazas, sort of that, which was sort of an idea that, the mechanical or the transportation would be underground or on lower levels, whereas everybody would live on something higher up. And that was totally controlled, so we did a combination of we had to marry Los Angeles to current day Los Angeles to Singapore and try to amp it all up. And so we would do stuff where the opening shots, there's a lot of there's a thing we created. It's called an AirPod, or we called it an AirPod. Well, not AirPod, that's what you wear in your ear, but it's a common. It wasn't a flying car. But it is like a private, small sort of. I based it on a drone technology. Little did I know that people are actually making those things. And I remember talking to. Did an interview with somebody who was and they were going, well, where did you get all this? And I said, I don't know, I made this up because, and they said, well, that's what everybody's doing. And I went, oh, well, I must have somehow, mentally known that to go with, my dad was a pilot. And so I knew something about aircraft, and then I thought, oh, well, we could combine these things and make it into it. But that thing flies into the city, and it's a combination of we mapped certain buildings in Singapore and LA, and visual effects supervisor Jay Worth, he did a great job of mirroring the two. And when we got to the interiors, we kind of had to do the same thing as well. So we had a lot of we shot interiors in Singapore as well, so not just exteriors, because they had some fantastic, crazy, nice architecture that we had to get.
Mm-hmm. Well, Westworld has a very rabid fan base, and a lot of them like to overanalyze scenes and look for like meanings and Easter eggs. So, does that influence how you guys design a set and what you put in as props?
Yeah, and I mean, yes, and I mean, we don't I don't always have, actually, honestly, don't always have time to like fully detail those things. But we, like, for instance, the decorator, Julie Ochbinchi, she just, in many ways, she's sort of she's funny. She's the sort of heart and soul of the show in a weird way. She likes to decorate based on character, and which is why she could be good at both Lovecraft and also which is all character, and then something more stylized or stylistic or futuristic like Westworld. And so but for instance, you know, it was, she can't just do anything straightforward. We would always have to have some kind of layers to it. So like I don't know, there's one character, Hale, and she has, you find out in episode 3 that she actually has a son, and which is really surprising because you think she's such a high-powered executive and sort of trying to take over the world basically, and she and you find out she's a mother. You know, you have no clue. And then so in her son's bedroom, she has a very tender moment with him where she has to sing a song and to him to put him to bed, and there are little like bows and arrows all over his sheets, and that was all to harken back to Westworld, you know. And we do stuff like that, but it's in the writing too. So Jonah Nolan and Lisa Joy, you know, who are the creators and showrunners of Westworld, actually write in this stuff. They're very keen on all the props and stuff. They're very important. They're like, you never know when you're making a prop whether it's going to be a key story point later on, and you're going, you know. So there's this, you know, Jonah's had me do. I remember doing 78 version of one tiny little thing, and I kept going, what the heck is going on with this? And then of course later on you find out that it ends up like in season 3 it was about storing IT in a spherical object, and then it's sort of like in season 3 suddenly now the spherical object is huge and it's controlling the world, and it's so the kind of exploring the technology and understanding how it worked might not have meant something to the scene we are actually doing, but in Jonah and Lisa's heads, they're already thinking way ahead, and which is, I think, why the fans like it, because there's always a connection, and you never know exactly quite, you know. So when you're working on it, and you're like, a lot of the crew, we're all sitting there like, what the heck? Where is this? What does this thing mean? And you find out. So. Yeah. Sometimes they would tell me, or I would get enough backstory that I would know, but then I'd always have to hide from the actors, because then the actors realized that I knew, and they would always try to track me down and try to get me to, like, I avoided Ed Harris for a long time, and then he nailed me a couple of times because he knew that I knew what things were happening, because a lot of times it wasn't good for them to know that they were actually a robot copy of themselves, you know, because they weren't supposed to be aware of it. So you couldn't let them know.
Nice. Awesome. And what's the latest on season 4?
I wish they're being very quiet about it. Yeah, I keep thinking, you know, that we, you know, I would like to go back to the park, but you know, I'm not sure. Nobody listens to me exactly. So, except actually, they did listen to me once about the. I said something about having a tank roll down the middle of. At the ranch where we shot, Melody Ranch, where they have the town of where the Mariposa is, and Sweetwater. Arnold Schwarzenegger stores a tank there that he just happens to have, and it was right next to my office, and I just said, one day I want to see that tank drive down the road. And so in season 3, all of a sudden there was a World War II park, and I think it was inspired by Arnold Schwarzenegger's tank, and so we got to go and do that, which was really interesting because it was supposed to be set in Italy. We actually shot that in Spain.
Mhm.
So, and that was a wonderful experience to be able to work with the Spanish crew and take over a whole town and you try to, we try to, because the parks are all interrelated and connected, and you find out that Lee, who sort of wrote all the backstories, was to get it done. He just kind of copied his own self and reworks it. So we always had to have stuff, Easter eggs even in what was supposed to be Italy during the war to reflect back to Westworld and the Sweetwater.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, Howard, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time and can't wait for season 4.